Chapter 8. Now I'm branded for taking the fall. It was another long, lonely night. Texts from Remus had become sporadic since he had to go back to his flat where his granddad was sleeping on the couch. Strangely, or not so strangely, Mooney hadn't kept texting him either. Of course, Sirius knew it was for the same reason Remus wasn't texting back. When Sirius woke, very late in the morning, with Crookshanks curled up on his pillow with her extravagantly fluffy tail strewn across his face, it was with an irritated groan. Not at Crookshanks. She and her tail were both perfect and could do no wrong, but at the fact that he was still waking up in his own bed instead of waking up next to Remus. How could 2 days of Remus have spoiled him so terribly? His mood lightened, however, when he turned to see a new message on his mobile. Quickly, he sat upright, earning a disgruntled yowl from Crookshanks, who was apparently quite comfortable, thank you, and immediately, hungrily, unlocked his phone to find the text was from Remus. Your Holiness, your mother is here. Help me. Shit. He sent that message an hour ago. In a flash, Sirius was out of bed, startling Crookshanks to run into the other room, throwing on any clothes he could find scattered about in his bedroom, the same holy jeans he'd been wearing the last 3 days, and his favorite Fidelius shirt. In the commotion, James peeked in through the crack in the open door. Everything okay? Remus texted me an hour ago to tell me that my mother was at the church already, Sirius said, bordering on breathlessness as he hurried to gather his mobile and his keys and his boots. Oh, poor Remus, James groaned. Funeral stuff? The prayer vigil is tonight, Sirius reminded him. I should have known she would show up early to order people around. It's her favorite pastime. Sirius grumbled, pulling his boots on without taking the time to lace them. And if Remus is texting me to beg for my help, she's probably badgering him most. Do you want me to go with you? James asked. Lily and I were going to show up fashionably late so that we could avoid literally everyone in your family except you, since, they're awful. I've told you already, you don't have to show up at all, Sirius said with a nonchalant wave of his hand. It's going to be a lot of posturing and people saying shit about my dad that isn't true, and my mother putting on a fucking show over how perfect their lives were. Trust me, you don't want to go. Of course I don't want to go, but neither do you, so we're still going, James replied sternly, and Sirius couldn't help but smile at the familiarity of his uniquely malicious nurturing. At this point, it's more so I can meet this mysterious priest that you're so obsessed with. Without looking over, Sirius groped around for James's face in the air so that he could playfully push him away. Now, do you want me to go over early with you or not? If so, I'll tell Lily she's off the hook and ride back with you. I'll probably end up staying overnight, he said, shooting a shrewd grin in James's direction with an involuntary flash of his thick, dark eyebrows. I mean, God willing. James let out a short laugh. Well, good luck in all your endeavors, sexual and otherwise, he smiled, picking up Crookshanks so she didn't try to bolt out the front door whenever Sirius went out of it. She loved being outside. No, really, I'll probably have to stay with Mother. Remus's homophobic grandfather is apparently sleeping on his couch, Sirius said with a loud sigh, shoving his phone into his back pocket. Yikes, that sounds like a winning combination. Your delightful mother and his grandfather. Don't remind me, Sirius groaned, diving back into his wardrobe to retrieve his black suit. Listen, don't forget to text me when you get there, James reminded him, like he always did every time Sirius left his flat. You're the worst about that, and I'm going to worry the whole time. I'll do my best, but I might be walking into a bloodbath, Sirius said, the aglets of his boot laces clicking against the hardwood floor with every step he took towards the front door. If I'm lucky, Remus will strangle her in a violent rage before she tries to cut out his liver or whatever it is those cultists do. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Catholic, James enunciated deliberately, and Sirius had to pause his race to the door because he was doubling over in laughter, hand on the sofa to keep him upright. I love you so much, Sirius laughed, stepping back to kiss James on the cheek. I'll text you. I love you. Good luck. Don't kill yourself trying to save a few minutes. James called as Sirius made his way to the car. You can't save Remus if you die in a car crash. He'll be okay until you get there. He'd better be, Sirius shouted. I haven't even gotten to kiss him yet. I wouldn't advise attempting that with your mother around, James yelled back, waving as Sirius shut the car door and slammed the car into reverse. He was speeding before he turned off of James's street. After sending a quick text of survival to James, Sirius paused at the wide-open double doors in the front of the church, wondering if he should go around to the back, to Remus's flat, to try and avoid his mother. The screeching he heard coming from the front of the nave gave him the answer he dreaded. These are lilies! I specifically requested orchids! Sirius heard his mother's distinct, biting tone, and he picked up the pace to try and save Remus from it. But Remus was not the one bearing the brunt of his mother's wrath. It was a nun. It was Mary, though Sirius had never met her. No time like the present. Mother, stop berating the nun, Sirius called as he walked down the center aisle. The woman in the black habit turned sharply, and Sirius finally got a look at her kind face, full of relief that someone had come to her rescue. I'm sorry, Mary, isn't it? Sirius asked with a calming smile. The lilies are beautiful. I'm so sorry, she said in a rush as Sirius tried to ease her worry, taking a moment to notice the frazzled way her dark brown hair was peeking out from the white border of her religious habit. The shop was out of white orchids, and the purple orchids were still twice the cost of the white lilies. She stuttered out, looking at Sirius with wide eyes, pupils the exact same shade as the color of her hair. Her olive skin was obviously flushed in her stress and embarrassment, splotches of pink and red across her cheeks. At the same time, Walburga stomped away in a huff, throwing a small bouquet of lilies that had been in her hand onto the green carpet, scattering yellow pollen over several pews. With a clench in his jaw, Sirius turned back to Mary with a deep sigh from his nostrils and a silent apology in his expression. The lilies are fine. They're beautiful. Really, Sirius assured her, wanting to take her hand because he was so accustomed to providing physical comfort, but not wanting to subject the poor girl to any more awkward encounters with the Black family. Ignore my mother. Where is Father Lupin? He's working on the funeral program for tomorrow, Mary answered with a strained smile, one that Sirius had seen on the face of literally everyone who was forced to interact with his mother against their will. She lowered her voice and to add, mostly just to get away from her, I think. I know the feeling, Sirius whispered in return, nodding sympathetically. I think he's trying to pick photos from the box you both retrieved from her house the other night, Mary said, a sudden astute smile on her innocent expression, eyelashes batted knowingly. Sirius went a little pink, lowering his head to look up through his hair. He told you about that? He tells me a lot of things, she said, pulling her lips into her teeth, still blinking deliberately in Sirius's direction. That pink on Sirius's skin deepened a bit. He was glad his mother wasn't around to see it. Right, Sirius cleared his throat. Should I go find him then, or... He will need your help with the photos, Mary said, her expression moving back into professionalism for a moment before it dove into concern. But Father Albus is with him. Sirius began to ask before sharply realizing that was Remus's grandfather. Oh. I'll go with you, so it doesn't seem like you know where his flat is already, Mary wisely suggested, nodding to the hallway that led to the basement. By the way, it's nice to finally meet you. Likewise, Sirius said with a laugh. I appreciate you picking up the slack over the last few days. My pleasure, she said with a genuine smile as they moved through the swinging doors. Lord knows Remus deserves some leisure time, so I'm glad you were able to help him with that. I probably just added to his stress, Sirius sighed, knowing the internal struggle his presence had been forcing upon Remus. But Mary shook her head, stopping at the top of the basement stairs. Let me assure you, she said, taking Sirius by the shoulder and looking at him with purpose in her deep brown eyes. He is noticeably happier when you're here. With a smile and a soft squeeze, she motioned for Sirius to follow her down the stairs. With a polite knock to the door of Remus's basement flat, she called, Father Lupin, Sirius Black is here to help you choose the photos for the program. Oh, thank God. He heard Remus groan from beyond the door. A smile crept unwillingly over Sirius's face. He tried to stifle it to appear as sober as he could, knowing who else was behind the door. When Remus yanked open the door, that belligerent smile flashed over Sirius's face again as he saw how unusually unkempt Remus was. His hair, while often wild, was now feverishly disheveled, curling around and over his ears, most of it violently pushed back, except for one thick section that was disobediently twisting down into his eyes. With one hand, he reached up to order it back, and it was successful for all of 2 seconds before it bounced back down into his vision again. The round, gold lenses that were ordinarily kept spotless at the uppermost bridge of his nose were now smudged with multiple fingerprints and perched rather precariously on the end of his nose. In fact, when Remus looked up at Sirius, his gilded gaze fell above the rounded frame, the lenses like a magnifying glass to highlight the blackened circles under his tired amber eyes. The standard black long-sleeve shirt he always wore was wrinkled and misbuttoned, the stiff white ring of his clerical collar sliding out of one side of the built-in high collar of his shirt, practically cutting into the underside of his jaw if he tilted his head just right. Good afternoon, Father Lupin, Sirius said with practiced propriety. Remus let out a groan. Christ, that's dreadful, he mumbled, bringing a hand up to pinch the bridge of his nose from over the top of his glasses for only a moment before pushing them back up onto his face. Mary, thank you for bringing him to me, Remus said with a smile of relief. Mary nodded, winking at Sirius. Don't work too hard, boys, she said with a knowing grin as she retreated up the stairs. Sorry, Sirius began to ask, glancing into the flat, but Remus immediately shook his head. He went up to the kitchen for a cup of coffee, Remus said, grabbing a fistful of Sirius's shirt at the chest and pulling him inside quickly. And if Sirius didn't know better, he would have thought Remus meant to pull him into a kiss with the frenzy and the recklessness of his movements. Instead, he leaned around Sirius and silently closed the door behind him. If that had been it, Sirius might have been disappointed, but Remus impulsively slipped his arms around Sirius as far as they could go, pressing Sirius deeply into the door and burying his face heavily into Sirius's neck, breathing out, God, I missed you. Oh, hi, Sirius exhaled in response, letting himself get caught up in the ecstasy of Remus's attention by wrapping his arms around Remus in return, his fingers finding their way into the back of Remus's touch-tousled hair. Do we have time for this right now? He asked warily, but he didn't let go. Remus just hummed the indifference, wordless at first, as if he couldn't convince himself to do anything but hold Sirius and breathe him in, until he said, You smell so much better than my sheets. A laugh bubbled from Sirius's lips. I'll happily go roll around in your bed a bit to refresh the scent for you. Or, better yet, next time, I'll just bring you a bottle of the cologne I wear, and you can go wild. I'd argue that you rolling around in my bed is much better than your bottle of cologne. In that case, you're welcome to roll around in bed with me, Sirius offered, moving to adjust the white insert of Remus's clerical collar so that he had more room of Remus's throat to press his lips against, which he did, slowly and willfully, eliciting the most wretched, despairing whine from Remus's throat. It may have been Sirius's imagination, but it sounded a lot like the gasp in Mooney's stripped, singing voice. You know damn well I would if I could, Remus said with a frustrated growl as he pulled back and tried to soften the wrinkles he'd gripped into Sirius's shirt before his grandfather returned. As his gaze roved over Sirius's chest, it inevitably met the new ink on Sirius's forearm. His eyes didn't widen the way Sirius expected they would. Instead, as he took Sirius's arm into his hands. His face softened into a smile. "A friend of yours did it for me," Sirius said carefully, watching Remus closely. "Pettigrew." "Pete," Remus corrected, with a knowing glance up to Sirius's face. "I know him." And he said it with the same cautious inflection that Pete had used to indicate he wouldn't say any more about it. So Sirius didn't press it, but he could tell that there was something about Pete that Remus wasn't saying, in the same way there was more that Pete hadn't said. Ultimately, it wasn't that important, but with the way Remus was delicately tracing Sirius's skin, careful to stay away from the still raw lines of the fresh tattoo, Sirius didn't feel the need to get Remus to focus on anything except what he was doing. "Do you like it?" Sirius asked, worrying his bottom lip. "It's a little irreverent." In response, Remus shifted back in to pin Sirius to the door again, with just his hips. The attention that Remus had been devoting to Sirius's forearm now moved to Sirius's face, while his touch continued to absently ghost over Sirius's overly tender skin, moving down over Sirius's wrist, into his palm, between his fingers. "It's brilliant," Remus said, with a subdued smile. "It suits you so well," he added, keeping his eyes on Sirius's as he brought Sirius's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the heart tattoo on Sirius's knuckle, the original of the one copied in his new tattoo. It was just a purse of his lips to Sirius's finger, but with the way Remus was watching him, he managed to make it look unduly salacious. His indelicate kisses continued across the back of Sirius's hand, turning it to pepper more at the inside of Sirius's wrist, moving up his arm, kissing a wide circle around the center of his forearm to avoid the freshly wounded skin there, until he reached the inside of Sirius's elbow, and Sirius's hands had nowhere to go except into Remus's hair. "You know, I kind of like this disordered look on you," Sirius admitted with a calculated intent as he tried to brush his fingers through Remus's unruly curls in an effort to get them to behave, though it was a battle that was quickly lost. In his defeat, he moved his hands down to Remus's shirt, straightening it on his shoulders before unbuttoning the one that had been fastened incorrectly. At the soft snap of that button being undone, even though he was wearing another shirt underneath it, even though Sirius wasn't able to see any of the skin underneath, Remus let out a weighted breath, a lawless look in his eyes. As Sirius corrected the buttons, he kept his gaze away from Remus's honeyed eyes, until he delivered a fatal blow by adding, "It looks like you've been really well fucked." Remus's jaw tightened as he swallowed. The honey in his eyes darkened into caramel, and he pulled his bottom lip into his teeth, biting down hard. "Jesus," Remus whispered through his teeth, drawing the vowels out into a pitiful moan that staggered out of his throat as he let his head fall back in a desperation and anguish. "Sirius." And for just a moment, his hips grew heavier against Sirius's before he stalked away from Sirius like a caged beast. "Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that," Sirius said under a specific intention. "But I wanted you to suffer a little." It was the same thing Mooney had said to him last night about Sirius's missed opportunity for a kiss or more. Instantly, Remus's eyes darted over to Sirius's face, taking the time only to narrow slightly before he looked away again. It could have been animosity, or it could have been recognition. "I'll forgive you if you promise to say it to me again when we're alone," Remus said, letting his eyebrows rise as he walked back towards the oddly shaped coffee table covered in photos. "For now, let's stage this so that it looks like we don't know each other all that well. You sit here," he said, pointing to a cushion as he passed it, and Sirius did, but Remus made a face. No, sit like you're in a stranger's house. You look too comfortable." Sirius moved to the edge of the sofa, feet flat on the floor. "Better." "Just how bad is your granddad?" Sirius asked, gritting his teeth as Remus moved to the furthest possible place around the coffee table from Sirius, but still within range to look at the photos. "He's disturbingly observant, and he is, without a doubt, going to know that you've been here before. We just have to make sure it only looks like it was once or twice," Remus said as he nervously chewed on the inside of his bottom lip, while Sirius tried to act like he wasn't watching it, for practice. "Technically, I have only been here once or twice. He just doesn't need to know I slept over both times." Sirius grinned arrogantly, while Remus tried not to look gratified, but failed miserably. "I have some experience in playing a part. I did it plenty with my parents," Sirius added with a shrug of indifference, noticing that Remus's expression turned a little pained at that response, and he sighed to make it audible. "I should be better at it, but you know I'm not," Remus said as he knelt onto the floor to grab a few photos, adding props to continue staging the scene. "Especially when it comes to you." "Would you like me to try being, I don't know, demanding?" Sirius asked, trying to think of ways to make Remus feel distanced from him, somehow. A curious expression moved over Remus's face. "Yeah, remember when I said I was a masochist?" He formed a comically wide smile. More like a wince, teeth bared. "I think that could go in a way we really don't want it to go with my granddad here." "Oh," Sirius said, quite pleased, tucking that piece of information away for later. "Huh." "Be emotionally distant and indecisive," Remus offered, shuffling through the photos, which seemed to be an excuse for him to have something to do with his hands. "I really don't enjoy that." "Okay, but I don't want you to hate me when this is over." Sirius's voice spiked in his panic. With a calming breath, Remus rested his elbows on the table, his face in his hands, looking at Sirius warmly. "Sirius," Remus said in a soothing voice, dreamy smile on his face. "You are such an idiot." "You know, you say that to me a lot," Sirius laughed, his cheeks feeling pink. "Because you're still listening to the brainwashing your mother left behind," he said, a little louder than he'd likely intended. "Remember when you said, once I got to know you, I would still think you were unlovable?" Remus flashed a riotous smile. "I've proved you and your mother wrong 10 times over." "Careful, Remus. You might admit something incriminating," Sirius said, once again using the conversation with Mooney as bait. But Remus didn't acknowledge the familiarity. Instead, he took an overly deep breath, his eyebrows furrowed in profound thought, and he opened his mouth to speak, reaching for Sirius's hand from across the photographs scattered over the table. Sirius reached back. "Sirius, he began to say, just as the door to his flat opened. In perfect timing, he and Sirius both subtly, but quickly, returned their hands to their sides. When Sirius looked over, he made sure to wipe his expression clean, hoping that Remus would do the same. In the open door of Remus's flat stood an older man with wavy hair that was just as untamed as Remus's hair, but white in color and down to his shoulders. If he had on a clerical collar, Sirius couldn't see it for the long, white beard that was hanging in the way, tied into a knot in the middle. His attire was more traditional than Remus's, simple long-sleeve shirt and black denim. What this man wore looked like a Roman cassock, the ends of his black robes tinted gray with how often they dragged along the ground. When he looked at Sirius from underneath wiry brows, he smiled, but the heavy bags under his eyes made his expression look sinister. "Granddad, this is Sirius Black," Remus introduced him quickly, and Sirius stood to shake his hand, though he wasn't entirely sure this man would shake his hand. "He's Orion's son. He's helping with the funeral preparations. I asked him to come down and choose a few photos for the program." Father Albus kept smiling, reluctantly reaching out his hand to take Sirius's in an obvious attempt to crush his finger bones to dust. "Wouldn't it be more comfortable to do this in your office?" he asked politely, and his voice was soft, but it still came out sounding more like a threat than anything else. At first, Remus's shoulders sagged. His mouth fell open as he ran his tongue along the back of his teeth in an obvious show of great displeasure. Sirius jumped in to save him, trying to channel what Remus had said about being emotionally distant and indecisive. "It doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I'm just doing this to make my mother happy," he said, keeping his voice flat with an underlying twinge of annoyance. While Remus looked sort of impressed at Sirius's acting ability, Father Albus's expression hadn't changed in the slightest since he walked into the room, and he apparently refused to speak any more on the matter, and Sirius refused to relent in speaking to fill the gaps, so they ended up in a silent stalemate. "Sirius, we just need 4 photos for the program. Pick any 4 you like," Remus said, with a strangely deliberate emphasis, looking at Sirius under a particular gaze. Sirius almost smiled as he realized Remus was encouraging him to pick his favorite photos. In other words, very bad photos of his father with ill lighting and stupid expressions and blurry resolution. Oh, this could be fun after all. In keeping with his emotionally distant persona, Sirius didn't reply. He just maintained a look of boredom on his face, vaguely scanning the photos in awkward silence as Father Albus watched him. In fact, it seemed like Father Albus was watching him unusually closely. Did he know something? "This one's fine, I guess," Sirius yawned, carelessly tossing the photo in Remus's general direction, though he had actually been searching for that photo specifically, knowing that his mother would hate that he chose that one. It was a photo of the 2 of them, his mother and father, standing side by side, as his father was turned away from his mother to chat pleasantly with a more attractive, younger woman. All the while, his mother was wearing the most outrageous scowl. Historically, one of Sirius's favorites. "Lovely picture of your parents," Remus added to the lie, trying not to smile. With a mildly irritated sigh, Sirius looked at the clock that hung above Remus's bedroom door. "This is going to take longer than I thought," he said, pursing his lips as he clenched his jaw. "Isn't there someone around who could get me a cup of tea and maybe some scones?" His act evolved into something a little more demanding, and he hoped Remus didn't mind, but it was ultimately for his benefit. "Oh, right, of course," Remus said, subduing a smile as he caught on quickly. In fact, he even went so far as to begin moving before looking up at his grandfather. "Actually, Granddad, would you mind fetching Mr. Black a cup of tea so that I can keep working on the program? I just brewed a pot and left some cranberry orange scones on the counter in the kitchen upstairs for Mrs. Black." Though Father Albus maintained his smile as he met Sirius's gaze, he remained stationary, so Sirius added an extra furrow to his brow so that he looked a bit more like his father, a little more snarl in his lip so that he looked a bit more like his mother. When reminded of the church's biggest benefactors, the old priest complied, though Sirius could finally see what looked like genuine annoyance in his grin. As soon as the door was securely shut, Sirius let himself fall back into the squashy cushions of Remus's sofa. "Oh my God, this is the worst," he vocalized, the groan pouring slowly from his throat. "At least now you get to try one of Harry's scones," Remus replied with a sappy grin. "They turned out quite good, actually, once we got past the flower incident. I wish you could have been here." "Turns out it was a good thing I wasn't," Sirius sighed, glancing towards the door. "Is your grandfather naturally this suspicious, or does he know I'm trying to seduce you with my gay wiles?" A short laugh slipped through Remus's lips. "He can't possibly know you're trying to seduce me, but he did have a very long conversation with your mother this morning, and he is very good at getting information from people without them knowing he was pandering to their conversation to get it. Not to mention, my mother loves to tell clergy members what an immoral degenerate I am, so I'm sure it came up." Quickly, Sirius sat up and snatched 3 more photos from the table, one that Regulus had taken in secret while Orion was raising his hand to Sirius, another that was so far out of focus that it was barely recognizable as Orion, and the last one was a family portrait of all 4 of them, Sirius and Regulus looking stone-faced and grim because they had been threatened into good behavior. "Speaking of your mother, where is she?" Remus asked, the concern evident in his tone. As Sirius handed him the other 3 photos, Remus didn't have to subdue a smile for these. In fact, it looked like he was subduing an expression of great distress. He shot Remus a grimace of apology. When I came in, she was screaming at Mary for picking the wrong flower arrangements to go on top of the piano, he said with a heavy sigh. I wonder if I should go and babysit her when I'm done here. Keep her from making Mary want to leave the divine service of our Lord. Remus laughed. See, the thing about Mary is, he looked pointedly at Sirius. She's almost as bad as I am. No, Sirius hissed in disbelief. I don't buy that for a second, considering you smoke and drink and curse and tell me how much you want to undress me in our texts. Remus raised his brow. First of all, saying I want to undress you is very different than actually doing it, but if given the chance, I would also actually do it, he stated with a suggestive glance, and Sirius was far too pleased with this admission. Second of all, Mary has the face of a saint, but the mouth of a... Sirius interrupted. Priest? He asked with a cunning grin that was almost too wide for his face. Not quite, Remus said with a mischievous smile. Nobody has a mouth like me. Under an aching breath at the first suggestive thing Remus had ever said to him, Sirius responded with a specifically explicit expression, pushing his tongue out wide over his lips and using its momentum to drag his bottom lip into his teeth, biting down onto it until his skin ached underneath, enjoying the way Remus watched. That's the goddamn truth, Sirius said in a hollow whisper, leaning across the table in some futile effort to get closer to Remus, and Remus surprised him by leaning back just the same. Of course, that would be the moment that Father Albus would decide to come back into the flat, leaving Sirius and Remus to quickly adjust their postures to avoid the appearance of interest from either party. Before Father Albus could get in a word, one that Sirius knew would be irritating to Remus in one way or another, Sirius cleared his throat rather obnoxiously, then stood, head held elegantly high. Thank you, but I must be getting back to Mother, Sirius said to Father Albus, taking the teacup in one hand and the scone in the other, pausing to take a bite. Delicious scone, he remarked to Remus, falsely accentuating the posh, nasal quality in his voice that sounded far too close to his mother's tone. As he ascended the stairs, he risked a glance backwards, lucky that Father Albus's back was turned, giving him plenty of time to raise an obscene brow in Remus's direction. And Remus raised one back, his grandfather's presence be damned. Sirius took another bite of the scone. It tasted rather sweet. His victory with Father Albus was short-lived, however, as he moved back into the nave to find his mother had already gone back to scolding Mary over something else entirely, having moved on from the flowers since Sirius had already undermined her on that front. With a tired sigh, Sirius swept in again. Mother, you are in a church. Lower your fucking voice, Sirius grumbled, throwing that curse word in just for the comedic irony, and Mary, at least, seemed to appreciate the humor in it. Shut up, Sirius, Walburga hissed back, spittle actually flying from her thin lips. After all the money we've given to this church over the years, they can't even manage to do a single thing right. Mary, what happened? Sirius ignored his mother entirely, lowering his voice to a more comfortable level before addressing Mary. The small woman's shoulders visibly relaxed in response. The funeral home mixed up 2 services, and they're bringing the casket this afternoon instead of tonight, as planned, she said with a tight expression of concern, while Berga made a sound of disgust. Which is why I told you to demand that they take it back and bring it at the time they were supposed to have brought it in the first place, Walburga said through clenched teeth. It's fine, Sirius reasoned, speaking more to Mary than to his mother. It's not like they're going to dump it on the lawn. I'm sure Dad won't mind waiting in the front of the church for a while. Most of the flowers have not even arrived, Walburga shrieked, incensed at the idea of Orion's body arriving without the appropriate reception. Sirius wondered if anyone would even send flowers for someone like his father. The pallbearers should carry the casket in only after everyone is seated. The priest should be seen sprinkling the casket with holy water. And just who is going to place the crucifix on the coffin if it is already here? You are not using your head, Sirius, which I'm sure is typical of you." Unbothered, Sirius shared a knowing glance with Mary before replying, "If it will get you to stop throwing a tantrum like a child, I'll take care of it." With a snarl, Walburga turned on her heel, not to walk away, just to turn her back to Sirius, like a child. "We'll just move up the vigil a few hours. I'll make all the calls, and you can continue fussing over your flowers. Does that work for you?" He's asked flatly. Without turning to acknowledge him, she provided a terse nod and stepped away in a huff, nose in the air. "Is she always like this?" Mary asked carefully. Sirius smiled. "I'm sorry," he said before running his fingers through the stubble on his face, trying to make a list of every person he was going to have to call in order to move this ridiculous exhibition up hours earlier just to appease his unappeasable mother. "If you need a break, I can take over from here." A kind, understanding smile moved over Mary's pale lips. "If it's for you, I'm happy to help. I'll call the florist to have them send all the flowers early. If anyone even ordered flowers, that is," she said with a sour expression and a roll of her eyes, to which Sirius could only respond with a sincere laugh. "If they didn't, go ahead and order some from me," he grinned. "Something celebratory." With a quietly contented smile, Mary raised both brows to show her approval before hurrying off to carry out her task. Meanwhile, Sirius took a deep breath and let it out slowly before taking the mobile from his back pocket to find that his mother had already forwarded him a list of contacts, because, of course she did. There were over 100 names on this list, 100 phone calls that Sirius was going to have to make in the next 4 hours. This was going to be a long afternoon. He opened the first one, clearing his throat as the phone rang. "Mr. Avery, hello. This is Sirius Black, Orion's eldest." It took nearly the entire 4-hour time frame he had before the anticipated arrival of Orion's casket, but Sirius managed to call everyone on his mother's damn list. Even Lucius fucking Malfoy, whom Sirius would rather set on fire than ever speak to again. But, to keep the peace for Remus, he did it. Of course, the moment he finished, his mother then chided him for still being in his jeans and t-shirt as the guests were arriving. Playing the part of the dutiful son, he fetched the suit he'd tossed into his back seat. Mary offered her room to let him change, but Sirius had a better, or worse, idea. With the pews filling and his mother busy pretending to be a grieving widow, while still managing to bark at Mary for not having the ability to keep a plucked flower from wilting, Sirius stood towards the back of the church, keeping a close eye on the swinging doors that led to Remus's flat. Of course, he knew Remus wouldn't come through those doors first, but that wasn't who he was waiting for. Sirius was positioned adjacent to the doors, hidden behind a rather austere pillar, so when Father Albus came through those doors, Sirius used their momentum to slip through without making any additional sound. Suit folded over his arm, he hurried down the stairs to Remus's front door. As he knocked, he softly called out under his breath, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." "You son of a bitch," he heard from the other side, only a moment before Remus tore open the door to give Sirius an accusatory expression. Scarred brow risen high. "Do you realize how—" He stopped speaking when he saw the vacant look on Sirius's face as Sirius laid eyes upon him in his funeral chasuble. Black velvet adorned with an intricate, repeating quarterfoil pattern in gold leaf covering the entirety of the garment, save for the solid black stripe down the middle with what could only be described as a cross of lilies in an alternating arrangement with small star-like crosses between each one. The gold in the fabric perfectly accentuated his golden frames, the golden gaze behind them, the golden glow of his auburn skin underneath it. There was a certain added darkness to the purple circles under his eyes, to the wiry hair on his face, to the curly hair on his head, afforded to him by the blackness of the velvet, and it somehow made him look wilder, more untamed, more treacherous, but at the same time, it also highlighted the enchanting flash of silver that decorated his left temple, that gray in his hair lending a calming softness to an otherwise dark veneer. The wide collar of his vestment hung carelessly from his shoulders, displaying the clerical collar that was in constant place around his elegant, slender throat. "Remus," Sirius said on a vacuous breath, moving into the flat and closing the door behind him, though he wasn't sure he was conscious of the floor moving underneath his feet or how his fingers were working of their own accord. A dangerous smile appeared on Remus's face, and maybe it was the way that smile began in one corner of his mouth, like a devious smirk, or maybe it was the way this bold wardrobe granted him the permission to liberate the formidable presence that he usually kept hidden. Whatever it was, it left Sirius entranced in his shadow, unable to breathe, unable to move, unable to think. "Oh," Remus hummed with a breathy laugh that echoed through the walls of his chest and moved through his throat like the call of a wild animal. "Does this look do it for you?" Remus started to ask, but before he finished, Sirius was answering, his hands inherently moving to touch Remus. "Yes," he exhaled heavily, hanging on the last syllable with all the breath he had left in his lungs, setting his palm flat against the center of Remus's chest before drawing it to the side, letting it follow the natural curve of Remus's body. A subtle twitch sent a considerate arch into Remus's brow. "I didn't know your priest kink was such a problem," Remus replied, stepping in as if he knew that Sirius would subconsciously take a step back so that he could easily press Sirius to the door. "Should I ask you to get on your knees?" he teased, taking Sirius's face in one hand so he could raise it to the ceiling. "Fuck," Sirius whimpered defenselessly, voice already raspy from how much breath was moving through it. He let Remus lift his chin as far as it could go, the top of his head against the grain of the door. "Did you come down here to undress?" Remus asked, with purposeful censure in his tone, as he took the suit that was draped over Sirius's arm and tossed it onto the sofa behind him, all without letting Sirius's face slip from his grasp, without retracting from where he was panting against Sirius's bared throat. "I thought you might like to watch," Sirius answered honestly. As he spoke, and swallowed, and swore, he could feel his Adam's apple dip down over the brush of Remus's warm and waiting lips. "Yes," Remus replied with the same inflection Sirius had used a moment ago. From where Remus was pressed against Sirius's frame, Sirius could feel him rise up to press a gentle kiss to the very tip of Sirius's chin, still uplifted by Remus's fingertips. After another kiss followed, a little bit lower and a little bit wider. A third, heavier than the first two, right where the underside of Sirius's jaw met his throat. The kisses didn't stop. They continued all the way down Sirius's throat, increasing in strength and number until Remus had to crane his neck to reach the base of Sirius's throat, where his collarbones met. "If I show up at my father's vigil with a heart-on, my mother will kill me," Sirius whispered to the ceiling, and the laugh from Remus's lips buzzed against his throat. His fingers loosened on Sirius's face. "That's the beauty of the religious vestment," Remus said with a satisfied hum, stepping back just enough so that he could gesture down to his torso. "I could probably fit you in here with me." "I'm sure we could work out the logistics of that." Sirius grinned sinfully, grabbing a handful of the soft velvet so that he could pull Remus back towards him. Apparently, Remus wasn't expecting that, because he stumbled back towards Sirius, the majority of his weight shoving Sirius firmly into the door. In his imbalance, Remus put his arm out to keep from colliding into Sirius's face, and he landed with a soft grunt, bracing against the door with his forearm directly next to Sirius's head. Batting his eyelashes innocently, Sirius looked up from where Remus was hovering over him, pinning Sirius to the door. "Hi," he grinned. "Hi," Remus replied in a whisper, his dark eyes darting over Sirius's features. "You know, considering how I admitted to propositioning you last night through text." He began, lowering his voice and leaning in close enough to softly brush the end of Sirius's nose against his own. It doesn't make sense for us to keep putting this off, to keep pretending like we can't prevent it from happening. He slid his hand further up the door that Sirius was leaning against, minimizing the distance between them until it was nearly non-existent, the only space between them in the air that they were exchanging through breath. "You're going to kiss me, aren't you?" Sirius asked needlessly, his voice wavering from the pounding of his heart and the insufficiency of the air in his lungs. Remus swallowed heavily as soon as the question left Sirius's lips, and Sirius watched it move all the way down his throat until his Stark Adam's apple disappeared beneath his clerical collar. As he tilted his head a bit to facilitate his intended movement, he brought his other hand up to slide down Sirius's jawline, his fingertips nudging softly against Sirius's earlobe. With a loose fist, he curled his fingers around the curve of Sirius's jaw, applying delicate pressure to coat Sirius into craning his head back so that their lips were more level. "Yes." His reply was short, intentionally clipped to conserve the little oxygen moving between them as they traded exhales. But there was still a nervous sway to his tone, a desperate sigh hidden within the single syllable. With a deliberately slow motion, Remus licked his lips to wet them, his dark gaze darting down as far as it could go before shifting it back to meet Sirius's eyes again. His lips still parted from the way his tongue had unsettled their borders. He only had to lean forward. As Sirius felt the soft weight of Remus's lips against his for the first time that wasn't an absent brush of skin, he let his eyes flutter closed in an attempt to memorize the way it felt, how Remus moved Sirius's bottom lip into the parted space of his mouth, and how he held Sirius there, motionless at first, as if he were doing the same thing Sirius was doing, desperately trying to study the providence of this kiss. Sirius didn't try to compare this to Mooney's chaste kiss through the mask, didn't try to evaluate whether the shape of Remus's lips were the same as Mooney's, didn't measure the direct warmth of Remus's mouth against the second-hand warmth of kisses through paper. In fact, Sirius didn't think about Mooney at all. All that was on his mind was Remus. The way he pulled in breath through his nostrils so that he didn't have to separate himself from Sirius. The way his fingers moved down to Sirius's throat in order to pull Sirius as close as he could get him. The way his lips parted further to draw Sirius in deeper. Remus's previously cautious kiss suddenly moved into desperation as his lips began to push into Sirius's mouth open wider, his fingers gripping Sirius tightly by the back of the neck to control the increasing depth of the kiss. With Sirius's trembling fists buried in the velvet of Remus's funeral attire, and Remus's wanting mouth opened wide with the intent to devour Sirius completely, a brutal series of knocks jostled Sirius in his place against the front door. Their eyes flashed open simultaneously, meeting instantly. At first, they didn't dare move, not even to part. Their open mouths stayed joined, for fear of the characteristic sound it would make when their lips closed and separated. Carefully, Remus moved his fingers that had once been on Sirius's throat to his face, softly and slowly closing his own mouth, coaching Sirius to do the same. Their caution paid off. When their kiss was severed, it was silent and solemn. But Remus, being the disobedient rebel that he was, immediately leaned in to unsettle Sirius's lips again, out of pure spite, and the kiss was much more voracious, much more ruthless than the one before it. However, he still took the time and attention to tilt his head just so as he drew away in an effort to muffle the sound. The insolence in his expression was indescribable, and it was glorious. "Remus, open the door," came the calm, demanding voice of Father Albus from the other side, accompanied by an angry rattle of the doorknob that Remus had apparently had enough sense to lock when Sirius came into the flat. With a gentle push to Remus's chest, Sirius forced him to take a noiseless step back from the door in order to get away from it. "I will not ask you again." Sirius's eyes widened. "Would you like me to come to the door naked, Granddad?" Remus misled, speaking with an air of vague annoyance in his voice, but Sirius could see the open throttle fury in his expression.
"You have 30 seconds,"
Father Albus bargained. At first, Remus didn't move, other than the tight, irritated clench of his jaw, and Sirius thought he might call Father Albus's bluff, if it was even a bluff. "Shit," Remus finally hissed, grabbing Sirius's hand and leading him quickly into the bedroom. He tore open the door to his walk-in wardrobe and gestured for Sirius to get inside. And Sirius was quick to comply, wedging himself into one corner, behind a suspicious number of plaid overshirts. "Don't come out, even if he orders you to, which he probably will, because it's worked for him before." At first, Sirius opened his mouth to address the fact that Remus had been forced to hide someone in his wardrobe before this moment, but Remus interrupted knowingly. "Don't ask, and don't come out until you hear me slam the front door." With one last aching expression, as if this were the last time Remus would ever get to lay eyes on him, especially in a state so disheveled and unkempt, he brushed the pad of his thumb over Sirius's lips. The distress in his expression grew exponentially worse as Sirius kissed his fingertip. "My suit!" Sirius winced just before Remus could lock him inside. Glancing back to the sofa, Remus nodded and shut the door. There were a few more seconds of silence, and Sirius imagined Remus tossing Sirius's clothes into his bedroom. The sound of the bedroom door closing followed, and then the front door opening, then closing, before there was a long, weighted silence throughout the flat.
"They are about to carry the casket inside,"
Sirius could hear Father Albus say from beyond the wall where Sirius hid.
"Your place is at the front door. What, may I ask, are you still doing in here?"
There was accusation in his tone, but the specifics went unsaid. A measure of calculated silence followed. "I haven't done a funeral in a while. It took me a while to find this stupid chasuble." Remus replied flatly. "If my place is at the front door, shouldn't we be moving a little more quickly?"
"What are you trying to keep from me?"
Father Albus asked immediately. "Empty bottles of expensive booze and several ashtrays full of cigarettes smoked down to the filter," Remus answered without hesitation. Sirius could imagine him meeting Father Albus's suspicious gaze with his own stern glare. "Or did you already find those in your earlier investigation?" The silence moved in again, lingering heavily before Father Albus finally responded.
"Don't be so naive to think that you're able to hide the way you look at Orion's son."
Shockingly, Remus laughed. "Are you kidding? He's gorgeous. Of course I'm going to look at him." An involuntary smile leapt over Sirius's face, and he quickly tightened his expression to stifle it, though no one else could even see it.
"Walburga has kept me informed on the matter. I'm well aware of his perverted lifestyle choices,"
Father Albus stated plainly, and Sirius was surprised to hear a pleasant hum from Remus. "Wait, he's gay?" Remus asked in feigned surprise, a delightful uptick to his voice. "Damn it, I could have been having promiscuous gay sex all week. Wish I would have known that sooner."
"Remus,"
Father Albus interrupted sharply.
"If
you find out what, Granddad?" Remus said in a threatening tone. There was silence for a long time. Eventually, Remus spoke again, but this time, his voice was so low that Sirius almost couldn't hear it, speaking under a self-effacing sigh. "Do you genuinely think that someone like Sirius Black would be interested in someone like me?" His acting was getting better. It physically hurt to hear Remus say those words, worse than any black eye. Shortly afterwards, it sounded like Remus opened the front door. "I have a vigil to lead, and since I can't trust you to stay in my flat without rummaging through my shit, I suggest you lead the way, Father." Again, after a long period of silence, followed by the sound of the front door slamming shut, the clatter of the hinges jarring even from beyond the wall, Sirius winced at the vibrations. Just to be safe, Sirius cowered in the wardrobe for a few more minutes, listening intently for any signs that either of them returned. but he was met with constant silence. Nervously, he ventured out, knowing it would look very bad for Remus if Sirius appeared from the wardrobe with his proverbial tail between his legs, after Remus had just, falsely, implied that Sirius could not be interested in him. But the flat was empty. A quick peek through the bedroom door confirmed it. In haste, Sirius changed into his black suit and, with the day's clothes bundled in his arms, he slipped through the front door of Remus's flat, up the stairs, careful to glance down the hallway first, before bolting out to the garden. He stashed the dirty clothes in his car before appearing again in front of the church's front doors. Sirius was relieved to see that the ceremony had started without him. The casket had already been carried in, sprinkled by the priest with holy water, and a crucifix had been placed upon the lid. The congregation was standing, singing some hymn about meeting again some day, directly opposed to Sirius's wish that he would never have to see his father in whatever next life there would be. "And just where have you been?" Sirius heard to his right, and he would have startled if he didn't know that voice so well. With a raised brow, he looked over at James, who wasn't looking back. Instead, his attention was fixed on the pulpit, where a particularly good-looking priest was standing off to the side of the professional singer Walburga had hired to lead the songs at the vigil in the service tomorrow. "Hiding from Remus's grandfather? In Remus's walk-in wardrobe?" Sirius answered under his breath, warranting a subtly prideful sort of expression from James's face. "Where's Lily?" "Back row." James pointed politely. "Next to your blue-haired friend." A delighted smile moved over Sirius's face as he saw Lily's bright red hair positioned right between Teddy's blue hair and the light pink pixie cut of his mum, Dora. That smile grew into something that made his cheeks sore when he realized that Harry was sitting on Lily's lap. The light in Harry's hazel eyes, shining behind his round gold frames as he looked up at Lily, had never seemed so bright, despite the dark purple of the bruise still surrounding his eye. It didn't diminish that glow in his eyes at all. Sirius's heart may have melted a bit. "Aw, I wanted to introduce you to Harry," Sirius said with a subdued laugh. "Lily was in love the moment he took her hand," James said with an affectionate, sappy grin, adjusting the lenses on his face so he could see the two of them more clearly. "According to Teddy, they've been watching Disney films all week, and Harry thinks Lily looks just like Ariel." "You'd make a pretty good Prince Eric," Sirius joked, nudging James with his elbow. "Harry said the same thing," James preened. "Well, not exactly. He said I could make a good Prince Eric if my hair wasn't so... what was the term he used? Wicky-wacky. And then he cracked himself up laughing because he said I looked more like Bambi's dad," James said, spreading all his fingers out and motioning wildly up either side of his head, curled around his hair, before adding, "You know, antlers." Sirius barely managed to stifle the laugh that barreled up from his chest. "Well, that settles it. I'm going to have to call you Bambi from now on. I don't have a choice. You can blame Harry if you must." "No, it won't work," James said with a phony, sad expression. "I already pointed out to Harry that his hair was also all wicky-wacky, but a little shorter than mine." His mouth turned up into one of the widest smiles Sirius had ever seen on it. So now he's Bambi. He seemed rather pleased about that. "Well, Bambi's dad doesn't have a name, so I'm not about to start calling you Great Prince of the Forest. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it?" Sirius hummed, deep in thought. "Isn't there a word that means the same thing as antlers, but isn't the same word? Like a synonym of antlers?" Trying to help, James began to guess. "Horns? Tusks? Points? Prongs?" "Prongs!" Sirius shouted in his excitement, in the exact moment that the song came to a close and the church was settling into otherwise silence. As James clapped his hand over his mouth to prevent his uncontrolled laughter from making the situation worse, Sirius stole a glance in Remus's direction, only to find a wildly amused expression on Remus's face from where he now stood at the mic, center stage. "I think you've just found my nickname," James whispered, still struggling to subdue his laughter. Now we all have one, Sirius smiled broadly. Padfoot and Mooney and Wormtail and Prongs. We just have to force Pete to be friends with us, James nodded. That shouldn't be too hard. No, I think the hard part, Sirius said, leaning in closer to James so that he could point blatantly to where Remus stood on the stage. We'll be getting that one to admit that he's our Mooney. Noticing that Sirius was pointing him out to James, Remus paused in welcoming the guest of the church to raise a specific eyebrow in Sirius's direction. As Sirius rose one in return, over a wickedly exultant smile, James nudged Sirius in the ribs and nodded towards the very back row where Lily was sitting. When Sirius looked over, he was met by a toothy grin, unruly hair that had been sheared by unskilled hands, and a bright hazel eyes behind golden frames. With Harry's eyes on him, and Teddy's, but Teddy was a bit better at pretending he didn't care enough to turn around, Sirius mimed the same thing James had done with his hands a moment ago, forming a crown with his fingers around James's head as he mouthed the words antlers to Harry from across the space. The laugh Harry tried to suppress was still audible, and Sirius just managed to catch a glimpse of the way Remus immediately responded to it, a softened smile moving over every feature, only a momentary pause in the scripture he was reading. As Sirius watched the way Lily playfully shushed Harry, pinching him by the cheeks and on the shoulders and under his chin, and the way Harry responded with an unrestrained smile, trying to cover up his own laughter with his hands over his mouth, throwing his head back as far as it could go and trusting Lily to keep him from diving down to the church's carpet, Sirius felt a prickle behind his eyes. This was what Harry should have had from the beginning. This was where Harry belonged, with them, with the family that they'd all managed to create together, across cities and circumstances and challenges. Strange that they had all found their way into each other's lives separately, one at a time, but how none of it would have felt right without any one piece missing. Sirius felt like this was the way it was always meant to be. And he never felt that feeling stronger than when he looked at Remus. Even reading from an ancient book of hypocrisy and human fealty, even standing on a stage that had been used as a tool of oppression for centuries, even wearing rich robes that were meant to symbolize the power and authority he'd been granted by a god who left them all on an empty rock to die. And maybe it was because none of those things applied to Remus. Maybe it was because he was the most genuine human being that Sirius had ever met, despite the pharisaic way he'd been raised. Or maybe it was because Remus used those tools of oppression and molded them into something he could use compassionately instead. Then again, maybe all of it was because Sirius found himself falling hopefully, happily in love with Remus. Once the vigil was over, the family was meant to line up just outside the open church doors as the mourners, if they could even be called that, because who, exactly, was mourning Orion's death, left so that they could offer condolences and hugs and handshakes and other bullshit gestures. Sirius and his mother were the only remaining immediate family. For a moment, Sirius considered asking his 3 cousins and his Uncle Cygnus, on his mother's side, if they would stand at the front of the church with them. But then Lucius fucking Malfoy would incessantly and disgustingly flirt with his cousin, Narcissa, and Sirius was not about to be subjected to that. Besides, there was a cutting sort of symbolism to the fact that Orion had so little family left, and Sirius wouldn't give him the satisfaction of pretending anymore. They had never been a happy family, a complete family. It was no different in death. Still, to avoid the shrill reprimand of his mother, Sirius stood by her side with a solemn expression that could be interpreted as grief as long as he kept the angry snarl from his lip. That was turning out to be a harder assignment than he thought, with his mother pretending to wail loudly any time the attention was drawn away from her suffering. Of course, there wasn't a single tear in her eye. And why would there be? After all, she inherited everything in Orion's passing, the house that Orion had himself inherited from his wealthy father, the money that Orion made off the backs of other people's labor. It was all hers. And Sirius would never see a cent of it. Not that he would want the Black family blood money, but he could certainly think of better uses than what she planned to do with the rest of it. If she didn't spend it all before she died, that is. It would all go to the church. Millions of dollars gone to fund more straight camps and shock therapy hiding behind the guise of austere stained glass and martyrs to propaganda. Every person who came out of those doors shook his hand, because Sirius physically retracted if anyone tried to hug him, and told him what a good man his father was, not knowing they were speaking those profanities to the child that good man had regularly beaten. Or, hell, maybe they did know. A lot of these people did. Corporal punishment was celebrated. Spare the rod, spoil the child, they said. There was a welcome reprieve when James and Lily moved through the line, skipping Walburga completely, which was fucking poetic. Without a word, James took Sirius into his arms, and they stayed that way for quite some time. Long enough, in fact, that Harry, who had until that moment still been holding hands with Lily, started to tap on Sirius's elbow in his impatience. With a smile, Sirius unwrapped himself from James and knelt to one knee as Harry excitedly barreled into him, hugging his neck so tightly that Sirius had no choice but to pretend to choke under the brawny strength of Harry's arm muscles. As Teddy stepped up behind Harry, ruffling his hair like a good older brother should, he informed Sirius that it was his own idea to crash the vigil, uninvited, because Sirius had mentioned what a dick his father was, Teddy's words, and they were afraid the rest of his family was just as bad. Trying, and failing, to stuff down the sentimental expression on his face, Sirius held out his fist to bump against Teddy's, and Teddy surprised him by wrapping his arms around Sirius's chest. But only for a second, so it wasn't uncool. Dora and Lily, taking their turns to give Sirius a hug, told him they were already planning the next Disney film night at Dora's with popcorn and candy and ice cream. When Dora asked him his favorite childhood film, Sirius went quiet as he realized he didn't remember watching many films growing up. He didn't remember playing in the garden or getting ginger beer after school with his friends, or staying up late with his brother on Saturday night. Surely he had to have done some of those things at some point in his youth, but all he could draw on was hours of mandatory extracurriculars, nights without supper, sleeping in the dusty attic as the winds howled through the cracks between the wood planks. And then he thought of that photo he'd been hunting for that night he and Remus had broken into his mother's house. He thought of his Uncle Alfred and Uncle William and building pillow forts with Regulus in their living room, using pillowcases for their flags. He thought of visiting the summer festival with Alfred's hometown and winning a goldfish for Regulus in a game of chance. Watercolor scales in shades of orange and pink and red and yellow. Those summers with Alfred and William were the only glimpse at childhood Sirius and Regulus had ever gotten to experience. Looking at Harry and Teddy, Sirius promised himself to dote on them the same way his Uncle Alfred had doted on him and Regulus. With a smile, he promised them that film night, and pillow castles, and summer festivals, and goldfish. Once most of the mourners had gone through the line, Walburga moved away with a haughty glare at the ragtag bunch of misfits that Sirius had adopted as his new family. His blood family was in ruins, anyway, and even if Regulus were still alive, he would have chosen these misfits over her, too. As Sirius stood from bending to adjust the crooked frames on Harry's nose, he straightened his back to find Remus Lupin standing before him, wearing a smile that was somehow just as joyous as it was somber, Mary standing slightly behind him with a smile that matched. Without a word, Remus stepped in and slid his hands around Sirius's waist, holding him as close to his frame as he could get him. With Sirius's arms around his neck, he squeezed a bit, just enough to move Sirius's feet off the ground, the way he had the first night Sirius had nearly kissed him. From over Remus's shoulder, Mary was smiling at them. "I know she'll never say it, so I'll say it in her place," Remus whispered into the dark, limitless curls of Sirius's hair. "I'm proud of you, Sirius." There was an immediate knot in Sirius's throat, his vision blurry with tears, half of them angry that Remus felt the need to say that in her place. "What you did for her today, she will never recognize, and I'm sorry, but your faithfulness has not gone unnoticed." "My faithfulness?" Sirius scoffed. It was almost ironic for a priest to call him faithful. At first, Sirius went to pull away from Remus's embrace, knowing that Father Albus was surely watching from somewhere, but Remus tightened his hold, burying in closer, nuzzling his cheek to Sirius's own. Faith isn't the absence of doubt, remember? It's the constancy of it, Remus said with a softened tone and a laugh to match, reminding Sirius of their first profound conversation, the night they had robbed Sirius's mother. Tonight, I watched you manage your mother, knowing that she would give you nothing in return, and I realized you didn't do it for her. You did it for Mary. You did it for me. A sweet sigh slipped through Remus's lips and into Sirius's hair. Your faithfulness isn't in a faith. It's in the silent promises you make to everyone around you. It's in the way you can keep them. And I see you keep them, Sirius. I see every little thing that you do, because I can't seem to take my eyes off of you. A few of those tears slipped through the barricades that Sirius had hastily built up to keep them in, and with a little sniffle, he reached his hand around Remus's neck to wipe them away. God, you're such a flirt, Remus. With a nostalgic laugh, Remus pulled back, but not away, as he slipped his calloused hand along Sirius's cheek, the pat of his thumb sweeping affectionately over what used to be a black eye on Sirius's skin, now wiping away the salty residue of Sirius's tears. His ethereal touch ghosted down Sirius's throat until it settled in his palm, heavy against Sirius's chest, letting it linger as a secretive smile moved across his face. After a few tender pats to Sirius's chest, he took a step backwards, letting his fingers fall away from Sirius's chest as slowly as they could to give Remus time to let his eyes travel all the way down Sirius's frame, from his silver eyes to the leather boots he wore under his suit pants, and back up again. Clearing his throat a bit, Remus leaned in close once more, tucking a rogue strand of hair behind Sirius's ear, before letting his fingers slide all the way down Sirius's jaw as he added, You look stunning in that suit, by the way, leaving Sirius to light up with a flush. Grinning, Remus knelt down to hold his palm flat out in Harry's direction to request that Harry please give him a high five. Harry, of course, accepted. Father Lupin. It's nice to meet you, James said with what sounded like a nervous tick to his voice as he shot his hand out. Remus, clearly also nervous, struggled to free his hand from the long, wide sleeves of his religious vestments, and they shook, both of them smiling. It's Remus. It's definitely Remus. He laughed. You must be James. I've heard so much about you. I feel like I'm meeting a celebrity. The pink that swept over James's cheeks spoke volumes. I know what you mean, he laughed, practically giddy, groping for Lily's arm from where she was still chatting with Dora and pulling her over to meet Remus properly. This is my wife, Lily. Lily, Remus said, wearing that same secretive smile as he took Lily's hand inside both of his own. It reminded Sirius of the way Pete had shaken his hand. Wonderful to finally meet you. As they spoke, Sirius glanced over to find Father Albus standing menacingly in the breach of the open doors of the church, stone-faced and unmoving as he watched, as he judged. But there was nothing that could ruin Sirius's mood, not even the threat of Remus's grandfather discovering their relationship. Remus was proud of him. His mother was nowhere to be seen. Harry was casually swinging from Sirius's outstretched arm, and his found family finally felt whole, though, for some reason, he kept feeling like Pete was meant to be here. It turned out to be a day of celebration, after all. When they all decided to go out for dinner afterwards, well, James decided and convinced everyone else it would be fun. Sirius was surprised that Remus agreed to accompany them. Hell, even Mary seemed like she would relent and join them, at first, but that was until she laid eyes on Father Albus, eyeing Remus ominously as he laughed at something James had said. Sharing a particular look with Sirius, she just grinned and told him to bring her a takeaway when they came back. Try as Sirius might to convince her it would be fine, she elected to stay behind and monitor the movements of Father Albus. Once Remus had discarded his vestments for his simple black sleeves and black denim, and his clerical collar, of course, They walked the block over to a restaurant that Remus said had the best Italian food in the parish. Over tandoori chicken and biryani and naan and samosas, they talked for what felt like hours, James and Remus quickly becoming fast friends, as Sirius realized they were so much more similar than Sirius had ever noticed. It was in their quick wit and their mischievousness and their overwhelming care for other people. Watching them bond was the highlight of Sirius's evening. Mind you, this is the first night I met him, Remus emphasized, gesturing wildly with his hands, and Sirius wondered if he'd ever seen him so animated. And already he's convinced me to break into his mother's house and rob her. By then, James was holding his ribs, evidently aching in laughter. He's very charming. I'm not surprised by this at all, Lily added with a beaming smile. Sirius jumped in to defend himself. He's conveniently leaving out the part where he invited me to his flat to get drunk before any of this happened, Sirius said, lowering his voice as he got to the part about getting drunk so that perhaps Harry wouldn't overhear it from the other end of the table. Which really makes the whole thing so much worse, because we were probably making much more noise than we thought we were, Remus said with a loud laugh, taking a swig of his dark lager. I mean, a cop did show up, Sirius reminded him with a roll of his eyes. Only because he thought I was mugging you, Remus groaned. Or attacking you? I'm still very unclear on that whole interaction. With a snarl, Sirius shoved the last corner of naan into his mouth. He was a racist prick. Interactions with them don't usually make sense, Sirius huffed. Wait, so you got caught jumping Walburga's hedge and you didn't get arrested? Dora asked. He didn't catch us jumping the hedge. He caught us... He stopped, pulling his lips into his teeth and shooting Sirius a glance of amused concern. Having a discussion. On the pavement. Is that what we're calling it now? James grinned, eyes darting between the two of them. Sirius cleared his throat, intentionally making his expression look sheepish, just to stoke the fires of curiosity that Remus had ignited. I had to tell him we were, praying, and he made Remus show him his clerical collar to prove it. And then it turned out he's a fucking member of his congregation. Hang on, he goes to your church? Lily practically shrieked. Remus nodded knowingly, bitterly. Yeah, he sighed. Friend of Orion's. A chorus of enlightened ohs moved through the table as they all quickly, individually, came to a mutual understanding. All eyes at the table then collectively looked sympathetically in Sirius's direction, except Harry, who was thankfully being distracted by Teddy. I don't know how you're going to get up there again tomorrow and pretend like Orion was anything except a shitty human being, James said, with a heavy sigh as he glanced back to Remus. The smile that immediately covered Remus's face was colossal. Oh, I don't know. I think it'll be more fun than you think, he said as he smiled at Sirius, giving him a not-so-subtle wink. Oh my God, you wouldn't, Lily said with a dramatic gasp, looking delighted. I did help him write it, after all, Sirius reminded them with a smug, faux innocent smile. Give us a sneak peek, Dora said, flicking a balled-up shred of napkin into Remus's hair, which, of course, got stuck there because Remus's hair was practically as wild as James's antlers. Or maybe it was even more wild than James's hair, but because of the elegant curls, it only seemed tamer. Either way, Sirius tenderly reached over and plucked the offending paper from Remus's dark tendrils. You'll hear it tomorrow, Remus said secretively. The whole table seemed to groan. Speaking of tomorrow, it's practically tomorrow already, Lily said, glancing between her watch and the end of the table to Harry, who had begun to yawn into his half-finished plate of gulab jamun that Teddy was reaching across the table to finish for him, one by one. We should probably get home. No, don't leave, Harry whined, having been oblivious to the conversation until that point. We'll be back tomorrow, Bambi, James said, curving his arm around Harry's head to roughly push his fingers through Harry's messy hair, pulling him close so that he could plant a kiss to the top of Harry's forehead. As Sirius watched, if he didn't know better, he would have thought Harry was James's son. "Prongs, can I sit by you tomorrow? You and Lily?" Harry asked, so sweetly that an audible sigh moved through Remus's lips, a saccharine smile across his face as he reached for Sirius's hand from underneath the table. Silently and secretly, Sirius reached back, reveling in the entire exchange. "Harry, we're not invited to the funeral," Dora corrected carefully, while casting a wince of apology in Sirius's direction. "Technically, we weren't invited today, but Teddy insisted we be there." "Come on, Mom," Teddy said, rolling his eyes. "You know I was right. His family is awful." Sirius laughed, leaning across Dora so he could fist bump Teddy, and Teddy looked smugly vindicated by it. "You don't even know how right you are. I was relieved to see familiar, kind faces," Sirius said, shaking his head. "And I'd feel better if you were all there tomorrow. If you want to be, that is." Before Dora could agree or disagree, Teddy surprised everyone by quietly stating, "Nowhere else we'd rather be than with family." Around the table, everyone's expression seemed to soften in harmony, all of them strangely but wordlessly affirming it, despite that they'd only known each other a few hours. "Amen to that," Remus agreed with a grin that was as playful as it was blissful, still holding Sirius's hand underneath the table. Discreetly, he looked back to find Sirius had never taken his eyes off of him. Together, they'd all walked back to the church, Remus carrying a plastic sack filled to the brim with styrofoam containers that held several different dinner options for Mary, since nobody could agree on which dish had been the tastiest, agreeing that Mary deserved nothing but the best after putting up with Walburga all day. At the church, James and Lily had gotten into their car to drive home, both of them waving from open windows as they drove away. Harry seemed especially distressed to see them leave, despite their assurances that they would return the very next day. But in only a few more minutes, he was yawning so deeply that Teddy had to drape Harry over his back to carry him home, elbows tucked behind Harry's knees with Harry's arms hanging over Teddy's shoulders. Dora turned to wave silently at them, her pink pixie cut looking white in the dimness of midnight next to the fluorescent blue of Teddy's hair. In the soft orange glow of the streetlight at the end of the church's car park, when Remus turned to Sirius in their new, sudden solitude, his eyes looked more yellow than they ever had, and it was like staring into an eclipse, a ring of gold hollowed by the black coal. At first, Sirius took a step closer, trying to feel the warmth from that obscured sun and the softness of the moon that concealed it. When Remus raised his free hand to let the back of his knuckles brush along the underside of Sirius's jaw, the warmth he felt wasn't from the heat of Remus's skin, but from the electricity of his spirited, consecrated touch. The sound of the large church door opening sent Remus's hand back to his side. Father Albus stood in the space between the doors, wearing his ever-present judgmental glare. With a sad smile, Remus allowed only his pinky finger to link into Sirius's own, on the side opposite from where his grandfather stood. On a sigh, he quietly admitted defeat. "I'll see you in the morning," he said wistfully. To avoid meeting the piercing eyes of Father Albus, Sirius turned and walked down the street to his mother's house. Earlier, she had surprised him by telling him she would like him to stay in his old room that night, but Sirius quickly figured out her motives. People would be at the house the next morning. She was surely keeping up the delusion, the act, the appearance that they had the perfect relationship. Her reasons didn't matter. His only reason for staying there were purely dishonorable. He only agreed to it because he'd already decided to stay with her for the sole purpose of being close to Remus. If Father Albus wasn't around, Sirius could probably get away with sleeping on Remus's sofa, or, Jesus, in his bed, but this was a close second. Well, really, it was a very, very distant second, but second nonetheless. All the lights in Walburga's house were off when he arrived. Sirius wasn't surprised. Part of him wondered if she even remembered he was going to be staying there at all. To prevent waking her, he moved in the same steps he and Remus had the other night, trying not to make a single creak in the wood flooring. But instead of going into his own room, that Orion had turned into a study very shortly after Sirius had run away from home, he went into Regulus's room. The wardrobe was still open from the last time Sirius had been in this room. He made a mental note to load all of Regulus's clothes into his car tomorrow before he went back home, never to set foot in this godforsaken hellhole of a town ever again. Oh, no, that wasn't right. Maybe he would never come back to this house. Maybe he would never have to see his mother's unpleasant face, but he would have to come back to this place, because this place was the one that had Remus in it. He wasn't about to pretend he could live without Remus. As he threw himself onto Regulus's bed, he recognized how it didn't really feel like Regulus's bed at all. It didn't have his favorite dark green blanket that Alfred had painstakingly hand-crocheted for Reg that Christmas when he was 6. Sirius had stolen it, that first. It was reverently placed across his own bed at home, alongside the maroon one that Alfred had made for Sirius the same year. It wasn't made up pristinely with military corners on the sheets, for fear of being reprimanded by their father. It didn't have Reg sitting cross-legged on top of it, with Alfred's old copy of The Hobbit spread open in front of him. Before he could register all the ways this room didn't feel like Regulus's room anymore, his mobile buzzed in his back pocket. He contorted in his place to reach it. It was from Remus, and there was a strange sense of satisfaction in the fact that it wasn't Mooney, that Mooney hadn't texted him all day, because Sirius was equating that with the fact that Remus had been the one unable to text all day. Your Holiness, I was hoping that, once the old geezer nodded off, I could convince you to come back, or I could sneak out to you, but he's still awake. Sirius, hell, I'll wait, if it means you'll kiss me again. That was a pleasant surprise. I'm literally weak in the knees. Your Holiness, I didn't expect you to show up, you know, and then you fucked me up with that whole bless me father shit. Sirius, I fucked you up? I'm sorry. You were wearing a velvet robe. Your Holiness, honestly, I did not realize you would be so into that. I mean, I really thought you were kidding about the whole priest kink thing. Sirius, it was not at all a thing until it was you. Your Holiness, well, yeah, vice versa. Plenty of women have tried the whole bless me father shtick on me before. Awkwardly unsuccessful. And then you say it. One fucking time. You could say it again sometime. I would not be upset about it. Sirius, maybe I'll say it to you in the confessional next time. Your Holiness, fuck me. Why do I want you to sexualize my whole goddamn profession? Sirius, because I've got a priest kink. Your Holiness, that's the fucking truth. Because you've got a priest kink. Sirius, Granddad still awake? Your Holiness, yeah, it's very easy to tell when he falls asleep. He snores like a fucking freight train. I think he's trying to stay awake to catch me. I'm sure he knows I plan to sneak out. Sirius, you snuck out last night? Can't you just do it again? Your Holiness, when I snuck out last night, it wasn't after midnight. I could pretend to do my job. Sirius, tell him that thing you told me about wanting to keep the church doors open late for people who need a place to go, and how Mary goes to bed early. Your Holiness, but then I'd actually have to stay here, and I'm sure he would be lurking. Sirius, just go upstairs, give it 30 minutes, then text me. He can't stay awake forever. Your Holiness, all right, I'm in. I need to kiss you one more time. Just one more time. Sirius, I don't know if I can stop at one, but maybe if we're careful, I can blow you behind the church. Your Holiness. Sirius, what the fuck? Sirius, too far? Your Holiness. Shit. Yeah, too far. Because now I'm going to want it. Sirius, is that a sin, Father? Your Holiness, I don't give a fuck if it is, but I'm a priest, for God's sake. Technically, I'm your priest. I absolutely cannot get caught with my cock between your teeth. by my grandfather, who was also a priest. God damn it. Sirius, you have never said the word cock to me. I am wildly turned on right now. Your Holiness. Oh my God, this is the worst. Pretend I didn't say it. Because, all right, yeah, you already know. I'll just admit it. It's inevitable at this point. I'm going to have sex with you. Sirius. Jesus Christ, Remus. Your Holiness. But it absolutely cannot be the night before your father's funeral, while my granddad is in town. Like, good fucking God. Sirius. You're so flustered. Is the threat of being caught getting you horny? Your Holiness. I need to say no to that. Sirius. That doesn't sound like a no to me, honestly. Your Holiness. I'm rethinking this whole fucking plan. I unquestionably cannot see you now. Sirius. No, Remus, I'll behave, I promise. Your Holiness. Sirius, it's not even you. If I see you tonight, I will do anything, literally anything, to let you blow me behind the church. Sirius. Fuck. You really meant what you said. Nobody has a mouth like you. Your Holiness. It's a gift from God. Sirius. Are you sure about this, though? It seems like a waste. I'm so close. Your Holiness. Dear God, please don't use that phrase right now. Sirius. Ooh, sorry. I meant I'm very nearby to your geographical location in terms of physical proximity. Your Holiness. Jesus, even the way you say physical proximity is hot. What the fuck is wrong with me? Sirius. I'll add it to the list so I can record you that voice memo you wanted. When's your birthday? Your Holiness. It's in March. You missed it, I'm afraid. Have it done by Christmas. Sirius. I'll put a bow on it. My birthday is November 3rd, by the way, in case you want to reciprocate. So just go ahead and jot that down. Your Holiness. I could probably arrange that. What would you have me say? Sirius. You said something earlier about getting on my knees. That nearly killed me. Your Holiness. I could tell. By the way, you said fuck afterward, which nearly killed me, you know. Sirius. I could tell. By the way you kissed me afterward. Speaking of which, feel free to invite me back. Any time now. Your Holiness. I'd love to reenact that. Trust me. But I feel so manic right now. I wouldn't have the power to stop. Sirius. You just said yourself. It's already inevitable. Your Holiness. Yes, but if we do this, we have to keep it a secret. And nothing is a secret with my granddad around. Sirius. Would you be mad if I showed up anyway? Your Holiness. Of course not, but I can't kiss you again tonight. I don't want you to be disappointed. Sirius. That makes it sound like I'm only here for the kissing. And considering this is the first time we've kissed all week, it should be pretty clear that I just like being near you. Your Holiness. God damn it, you're so adorable. And just a reminder, this isn't the first time we've kissed. There's a hickey on your neck to prove it. Sirius. I mean a proper kiss. And good God, was that a proper kiss? The only thing that was missing was your tongue in my mouth, like you promised. Your Holiness. In case you couldn't tell, I was on the verge of losing my damn mind and tearing your clothes off with my fucking teeth. If my granddad hadn't interrupted, you would have gotten tongue. Sirius. Okay, yeah, maybe I should stay here. That was so much hotter than I expected. I might need to get off before I see you again. Your Holiness. God damn you, Sirius Black. By the time he got that last text from Remus, he was already out of bed, making deliberate steps on the spots where the floorboards didn't creak. In his hurry to potentially see Remus, because he wasn't sure Remus would even be in the nave upstairs, since they'd already called the whole thing off, he kept missing the particular places he meant to step, and the wood planks were singing beneath his feet. Sirius! He heard his mother shriek from down the hall. With a wince, he went still. "It's me, Mother," he called in a half-whisper, adding a believable lie. "I'm headed to bed."
"I don't care! Quit making such a racket!"
she screamed back, and it was followed by the whoosh of her thick down comforter being thrown back over her head. Sirius rolled his eyes, but that was much more careful about his subsequent steps, keeping on his tiptoes to minimize the places his weight dispersed. It took him a fair amount of time to get back out through the back door, and, once there, he had to wait inside the hedges at the fence as a group of older teenagers on a mission of midnight mischief came barreling past Walburga's house. Smoothly, he climbed the fence and vaulted over the top. On his way back to the church, he kept away from the pavement, stayed close to the brush that ran alongside, avoiding the illuminating light of street lamps flickering in the dark. Nobody was on the street, but he didn't want to take the chance of being spotted, being stopped from his own mission. From a distance, he could see the church doors were open, which meant Remus had left his flat after all. However, what he couldn't tell from there was whether or not Father Albus had decided to follow him upstairs. Stealthily, he moved in closer, peering around the edge of the open door. About that time, he heard the chords of a familiar song being played on piano. With a knowing smile, he peered over to see Remus hunched over the keys, just like he had been the last time Sirius had shown up at the church without telling him. That time, when he'd played that song about being ruthless, Sirius could see the fatigue in his face, could hear the sadness plinking out a broken melody through his fingertips. This was nothing like that. Remus was still bent low over the keys, but his head was not collapsed onto the fallboard. Instead, his fingers moved in a steady, deliberate pace under a hopeful cadence, his body leaning into the movement of his hands as they danced up and down the keys. "Painted skies," he sang faintly, without intention, but just with the longing to be closer to Remus, to hear his voice more clearly. Sirius stepped further into the church, moving along the wall closest to where the piano sat elevated. "I've seen so many that cannot compare to your ocean eyes." His voice moved up to find that high note with uncommon ease, his eyes closing in a revelry of melody. Once Sirius got close enough, he started the next line, he and Remus singing together for a moment. "The pictures you took that cover your room." Sirius added as he noticed that Remus let his own voice fade out while he continued to play, unsurprised by Sirius's presence. Finally, Sirius sat down on the short bench next to Remus, their thighs pressed together tightly. A quick glance shared between them as Remus pressed the pedal with his right foot, nuzzling his leg softly against Sirius's as he did. With a strange realization of the next line, Sirius sang it, looking at Remus with wonder and supposition. "And it was just like the sun, but more like the moon." As the lyrics moved fluidly from his lips, he increased the volume and delivery of those last two words with indirect implication, adding a soft pinch to Remus's ribs as he sang them, just in case it wasn't clear enough. By the curious smile on Remus's face, Sirius accepted it as fair enough answer, because he didn't ever want Remus to stop singing to him. "A light that can reach it all." Remus continued the next line, holding it out as he watched Sirius from the edge of his golden gaze, behind the rims of his glasses. "Now I'm branded for taking the fall." In the serenity of the interlude that Remus played effortlessly on the keys, Sirius allowed himself to lean over and rest his head on Remus's shoulder, tilting his face a bit so that he could feel the warmth of Remus's throat against his forehead. With a quick breath, Remus moved into the last few lines, nudging Sirius a bit with his shoulder so that Sirius would join him in singing them. Sirius smiled, knowing. "So, when you say forever, can't you see?" They sang together as the weight of Remus's fingers increased in his press of the keys, the chords growing to a breathtaking crescendo. Lifting his head, Sirius let his fingers slide down the opposite side of Remus's jaw, pulling his face towards him so that they could look into each other's eyes as they sang the last line together. But at the last moment, Remus let Sirius carry it alone, taking a deep breath as his focus shifted between the constancy of Sirius's gaze and the way his hand slipped away from Remus's skin, and how his lips voiced a nervous, delicate tremble as he sang the last words, a confession that had been building in his throat for days. "You've already captured me." At once, Remus's melody stopped, his shaking fingers moving from the keys so they could apprehensively rise towards Sirius's face, where he allowed his fingers to do no more than lightly trace the sharp line of Sirius's jaw. "Sirius," Remus whispered on the exhale of that breath he had taken in, his hand hovering like apparitions as they molded to the outline of Sirius's face, without more than a breath of a touch. He didn't say another word as he leaned in, pressing his forehead to Sirius's own, their uneven breathing beginning to quicken in time with the others. With his lips parted, Remus tilted his head.
"Good evening, Mr. Black."
The even voice of Father Albus startled them apart. In his alarm, Sirius scrambled off the bench to a standing position, nearly at attention. Remus didn't turn. He just let his head hang forward over the keys, eyes screwed tightly under furrowed brows, jaw clenched in frustration. "Sir, this is my fault." Sirius started into explanations quickly. "I was desperate for companionship in my grief, and Father Lupin did nothing more than show me a little kindness." Father Albus interrupted.
"That's enough."
But Sirius wasn't finished. "I exploited that generosity for my own selfish desire for—"
"I said that's enough."
"No, you don't understand. I manipulated him into doing what I wanted him to—" "Sirius," Remus finally interjected, with a muted sigh. He looked over at him with dulled amber eyes, dark circles making them look hollow and empty. "It's okay. This was inevitable, wasn't it?"
"I suggest you return home immediately,"
Father Albus commanded. Sirius responded with a solemn nod and fists clenched at his sides, biting back the snarl forming in his pursed lips by running his tongue over the front of his teeth from behind them. As Remus moved from the piano, he didn't look back at Sirius. In fact, Sirius watched him the whole way, just to be sure. Not even a glance.